Hello everybody, my name is Canadian, and today we will be talking about all of the mid to late game armored vehicles for the Warden faction in Foxhole. So on the left side here you'll see the list of Warden vehicles. That is the list that we will be covering in today's video. So that'll range from all of our tank variants from the Devitt Mark III through to the Outlaw, as well as some lighter vehicles like the Scout tanks, the half-tracks, as well as the APC. So a few notes, just to set things straight before we get started. Any section with an A means that info is either unavailable or does not apply to that vehicle. If you do find a mistake within this guide about the specs, not about my tips and tricks, because those are my personal opinion on them, just feel free to DM me on FOD with proof, and I will update this guide. The King Gallant Mark II icon for the Warden is too blurry to scale it to proper size, and thus I've replaced its picture. So that's just to explain why the King Gallant Mark II's photo is a bit different than the rest of the vehicles. As battle tanks are not currently in game at the time of this video, I will not be covering them. That's all variants. The texture location for each vehicle is not a set number. However, the numbers are there just to give you a rough idea of when in the tech tree they unlock. Later on, okay, well, this isn't related to the video, but I do plan on adding armored car variants as well as field guns later to this specific guide. I will leave a link to this guide in the description of this video if you want to check it out. And this guide is meant to cover mid to late game armored fighting vehicles. Push guns, armored car variants, and early war vehicles are not covered. Without further ado, let's get started. So Warden vehicles, we're going to be covering just the Warden faction in this video. I'll be making a separate video to cover the Colonials. So to start off with, we have the Devitt Mark III. This is a light tank for the Warden faction. It has a crew of 3, that would be the driver, gunner, and commander. It has a cost of 140 armats in the garage, or 420 armats for a crate in the MPF, that is without a discount. It's disabled at 30% HP, that'll be standard among all tanks in the game, so I won't be covering that from here on out, unless it is different. The main armament for the Devitt Mark III is a 40mm cannon with 40-meter range. That is bog standard for as far as armament for light tanks go. It has a reload speed of 5 seconds, so half a second quicker than the Colonial light tanks, 1,950 hit points, and 10,000 armor. It is fairly quick, with going 8.6 meters per second on road and up to 5.7 meters per second off road. It is pretty quick, pretty mobile. It has a fuel capacity of 200 liters, which is pretty decent for a light tank, and a consumption rate of 15 liters per minute. That is also not bad. So some nicknames you'll hear these called on the battlefield will be the LT, the Devitt, the standard light tank, or the Mark III. The most common one I've heard is the Devitt. And this plays as a versatile light tank. So for pros, it has pretty good mobility, good firepower, decent protection, and versatile. For cons, it has a slow turret traverse. So additional specs. So this is the first real, quote-unquote, real Warden tank that gets unlocked. And when I say real tank, I mean it has like good survivability and has a 40mm cannon. Mind you, this armament does get a little bit outmatched later on when later vehicles unlock, but for when it unlocks, it's the best tank that the Wardens have access to. So the fuel tank is located in the rear, and it normally unlocks around tier 8 to tier 9 in the tech tree. So if you're coming up against one of these, how do you kill it? The Devitt Mark III is vulnerable to flanking infantry just due to that poor turret traverse. It is also outmatched by later game tanks due to its lower survivability. So 1,950 hit points is pretty good for most vehicles. Later on, tanks like the medium tanks and the tank destroyers, they do outclass the light tank when it comes to survivability. So some personal tips. This is a great tank just overall, it's a good vehicle. When first tacked, it is the strongest vehicle in the Warden arsenal. However, you do still need to be careful of enemy AT as well as enemy tanks. Once more later tanks get unlocked, the Devitt Mark III does become obsolete, in my opinion. In recent days, the Mark III gets tacked along with the Mark IV Ironhide, which has more survivability, thus making the Mark III useless. It's not. I wouldn't say it's useless, but it definitely falls out of favor as opposed to the Mark IV. Okay, the next tank we'll be covering, the Devitt Ironhide Mark IV. This is the first variant for the Devitt chassis. This is a light tank, again, for the Warden faction with the same 3 crew, that driver, gunner, commander. It is a little bit more expensive, costing 150 armor mats in the garage, or 450 per crate. Again, no discount. It's again disabled at 30% hit points, and it has the same armament, 40mm gun with 40-meter range and a 5-second reload. It has the same amount of health at 1,150, but this is the real big difference between the Devitt Mark III and the Mark IV. This thing has 14,000 armor. That is 4,000 more than the Mark III, and for a tank in the game currently, that is a lot. I'll get onto that in a little bit. Due to the increased armor, it does have a little bit less speed, both on-road and off-road, at 7.8 meters per second on-road and 5.3 meters per second off-road. So you're going to be losing about half a meter a second there. Same fuel capacity at 200 liters, but it does have a little bit higher fuel consumption rate just due to the added weight at 18 liters per minute as opposed to 15. So some nicknames here is the ULT, the Ironhide, which is the most common, as well as the up-armored light tank sometimes. And the playstyle, this has a slightly different playstyle. It is a line tank or a support tank. So some pros, it has great protection. It has pretty good firepower. It's still nothing to be laughed at. It still retains decent mobility of the chassis, but it is a little bit less so compared to the standard light tank, just because it has more armor on it. And it is still versatile. And it keeps the slow traverse speed of the Devitt Mark III. That is just a common problem among this chassis. So additional specs. So this had the extra 4,000 units of tank armor compared to the standard Warden light tank at the cost of reduced mobility and fuel consumption. That is essentially what this thing is. It has the extra armor, which is amazing, but it does lose some mobility out of that. So what this tank does, the big difference is the armor. So it gains 4,000 extra units of armor. Mind you, the bounce chance and everything, that stays the same among the two, but the extra armor on this vehicle allows you to stay in the fight longer without your armor degrading to a point where you need to go back and repair the armor. So keep that in mind. It does not affect the bounce chance of the vehicles. The vehicles between the Devitt Mark III and the Mark IV are the same. Just that armor means you can stay in the fight longer with effective armor. The fuel tank in the rear again, and it is normally rated around the Devitt Mark III in tier 8 or 9 range, sometimes in the same tier, sometimes in the next tier after that. How to kill this thing? So infantry attacking from the flanks, it's pretty self-explanatory, as well as attacking enemy tanks. This does have low HP compared to later on tanks, so it doesn't take very many penetrations to disable and kill this thing. Some personal tips. The Ironhide is a variant of the Devitt Mark III that trades mobility for improved armor. The Devitt Ironhide can stay in the fight longer while still dishing out hits of its own with the same reload speed compared to the Mark III Devitt. Unlike the Devitt, the Ironhide does not become obsolete later on in the war, often being on the flanks of a tank line defending the tanks with more firepower due to its larger armor value, which drastically increases its survivability long term. Also, in my opinion, the Ironhide is the best urban combat tank that the Wardens have. It's since the downsizing of the light tanks, it can fit in much smaller places. It has the armor that it can just stay in that fight for longer, because it's a guarantee you're going to be hit by infantry AT, and just being able to take that hit and your armor stays effective is huge. As well, I find you will not be using the extra range of some other vehicles like the Outlaw. Like, the extra range doesn't really matter unless you're in bigger cities with long straight roads. Like, I can only think of a few, like Therizo, maybe Callum's, but otherwise, this tank will do the job. Okay, next vehicle is the final Warden variant on the Devitt chassis. This is the Devitt Caine Mark IV MMR. This is a light tank for the Wardens, same crew of 3, the driver, gunner, commander, and it has the same cost of the Ironhide at $150 per tank in the garage, and 450 RMATs for a vehicle crate in the MPF. Again, no discount. It's able at 30% like normal, and it has a mortar tube as its main armament with no secondary. The main armament range varies anywhere between 45 to 80 meters, with a reload speed of 3.5 seconds for the mortar. It shares the same survivability as the Devitt Mark III with 1,950 hit points and 10,000 armor, and it shares the same mobility at 8.3 meters a second on-road, 5.7 meters a second off-road, 200 liter fuel capacity, and 15 liters a minute. So that is all the same as the standard Devitt, except for the armament. So some nicknames you'll hear people call this is the MLT, the Mortar Light Tank, or the Mortar Tank. The playstyle is different. It is armed with a mortar, not with a direct fire cannon. As such, you'll be playing this a lot different. You'll be playing this as support artillery behind the main tank line. Some pros: it has good long-range firepower, and it has pretty good protection for a mobile artillery piece. Cons: it shares a slow turret traverse, although that is not that big of an issue, as this is an artillery piece, not a tank. It does have poor anti-armor capability and a poor inventory. So for most other tanks, they have 1 to 3 slots where you can stack up to 100 shells for that specific vehicle. However, for this tank, I believe you only get around 19 slots for it, and mortar shells do not stack, so that means that you can carry a total of 19 shells, 18 plus 1 in the chamber before you have to go rearm. So that really does limit this vehicle unless you have a strong logistics logi train behind it to keep bringing those shells in to keep this tank shooting. As well, this is open-topped, which does leave the gunner and spotter exposed in the turret. That is not that big of an issue. It's just something you do want to be aware of in case infantry do get above you. They can shoot you out. So, additional specs. So the 45 to 80 meter range allows the mortar light tank to stay away from other tanks and infantry, which may cause it harm. The MLT is open-topped, which allows for more view range without using binos, but again, you are exposed. The fuel tank subsystem location at the rear, again, same chassis, same fuel tank. This does tag a little bit earlier than the Devitt Mark III and the Mark IV at around tier 6 to 7. So you will get your hands on this before you get your hands on the other variants, unless you skip this in the tech tree. How to kill this? Really, any anti-tank weapon or a tank should be able to kill the mortar light tank, no problem, provided they get within that minimum range of this tank, which is 45 meters. Personal tips. So the mortar light tank is a support vehicle designed to provide close fire support for friendly units. It should stay behind the main tank line and provide artillery support. If the MLT lands a lucky blow, it can track as well as kill an enemy tank spotter, provided they have the hatch open. The mortar light tank is also a great counter against push guns, as well as anti-emplacement AT guns, and general suppression of enemy armor. Not to mention, it is a mortar, it does do damage to structures, so this can pretty much hit anything you want to target. One thing to be wary of is do not hit garrisons with howitzers on the back of them, because howitzers will rip you apart. Now we get on to the first medium tank for the Wardens, the Silverhand Mark IV. So this is for the Warden faction. It has a crew of 4 with a driver, a main gunner, a secondary gunner, and a commander. Being that this is much bigger, it is quite a bit more expensive at 170 RMATs per vehicle in the garage, or 510 RMATs per crate. Again, no discount. It is disabled at 30% HP, just like all the other vehicles currently, or so far in this guide. Its main gun is a 68mm anti-tank gun, with its secondary armament being a 40mm cannon. So the primary range, that is the range of the 68mm AT gun, is 35 meters, with the secondary range being 40 meters. Reload speed is 5.5 seconds for both, so half a second longer than the light tanks. but it does have more survivability. It has 3,100 hit points and 13,300 armor. It still has relatively good speed forwards and backwards at 8 meters a second on-road and 5.4 meters a second off-road. However, there is a big caveat to that. I will cover that in a moment. Fuel capacity is at 225 liters. Again, that's pretty respectable, not bad. And it has a fuel consumption rate of 18 liters per minute. So the nicknames, there's only really two. There's only one you'll hear, which is the Silverhand. There's two you might see in like chat, which is the SVH. Yeah, that's the Silverhand. The playstyle of this is a line tank. Okay, line tank. The pros, this has amazing firepower, provided you get both guns on target. Good protection, and it is fairly versatile with its two different cannons. The cons is the limited range on the AT gun, on the hull gun. Limited arc of fire on that 68mm gun in the hull, and it port traverse speeds. That's both for the turret traverse on the 40mm gun, as well as the hull traverse of the tank itself. It is very, very slow. So additional specs, this tank sports a second hull-mounted AT gun in the hull with a 35-meter range. Okay, that gun is very good at taking out enemy vehicles. However, don't bother shooting at any structures. It is very, very poor. It takes multiple shots to even kill a normal pillbox. Don't bother. The texture location is a late war tank, typically in tier 9 to 10. So you will be unlocking this after you unlock your light tanks. How to kill. So really any flanking maneuver and staying out of the arc of range of the 68mm gun on the Silverhand should give you the upper hand in engagement due to the tank's slow traverse speed and limited firing arc for the hull gun. Essentially just make sure you do not let the Silverhand get that 68mm gun to bear on you. Otherwise, you can, if you're in a light tank, you can pretty much stay out of the arc of fire of it. You only have to take on the 40mm gun, and you should be good to go. Again, this thing cannot turn very well, so it will be difficult for the driver to get that hull gun on target. Personal tips for using this. The Silverhand Mark IV, with its incredible firepower and good survivability, is the best general purpose tank the Wardens have access to. Drivers should keep in mind, however, the slow traverse speed, as well as limited arc of fire on the hull-mounted cannon. This should be the main tank in any push due to its versatility with both the 40mm gun and the 68mm gun. As I've said, the 68mm gun is great against vehicles, with an improved penetration bonus. But again, it really suffers against structures, and the 40mm is great against both targets, both tanks and structures. It does really well. Next, we have the Silverhand Chieftain Mark VI. This is a medium tank, again based on the Silverhand chassis. For the Wardens, same crew of 4. It has the driver, the hull gunner, the turret gunner, and the commander. It is more expensive than Silverhand at 185 armats per tank in the garage, or 555 per crate in the MPF. Again, no discount. That is a trend here. Same disable same time gets disabled at 30%. It sports a main armament of a 250mm spigot mortar in the hull, with a secondary 12.7mm machine gun on the turret. The range of that spigot mortar can range anywhere between 6 to 25 meters, and the machine gun can go anywhere from 37 to 41 meters is its maximum range. The reload speed is 5.5 seconds for the hull gun and 5 seconds flat for the machine gun. It has the same health at 3,100 and same armor at 13,300 as the normal Silverhand, but it is a little bit slower at 7.7 meters per second on-road and 5.5 meters per second off-road. Same fuel capacity, 225 liters, and same fuel consumption rate at 18 liters per minute. So the only nickname you'll hear this thing called is the Chieftain. I've never heard anything else. So I never heard anyone call it anything else. So the playstyle of this, it's a PvE bunker buster. This is the best bunker busting tank in the game, period. So it has amazing anti-structure capability, the best in game, and it has a good anti-infantry machine gun. Cons, again, limited traverse speeds for the hull. That's a theme among this chassis. And it also has limited inventory space for ammunition. I think only being able to carry like 7 or 8 shells for that 250mm mortar. The fuel tank is located in the rear, and again, it techs normally in between the Devitts and the Mark IV Silverhand, so it'll be around tier 8 to tier 10. How to kill? So any tank rush should kill it, as it has no anti-tank counters. The infantry AT should be avoided unless from cover, as that 12.7mm gun will rip you apart, and it has a very fast traverse speed, unlike all the other turrets that we've seen so far. This thing can whip around. Personal tips. So this is the best anti-concrete tank in the game. It should not be deployed alone, as it has no defense against enemy armor, and it also has to get close to enemy defenses to use its spigot mortar. So do be prepared to take damage. When deploying, expect the chieftain to die, but do make sure you bring enemy defenses down with you. This tank is meant to be played very aggressively without regard for its own well-being. Think of the machine gun as a temporary defense to get in range for your main weapon hit structures. So think of this machine gun as a temporary defense against any infantry trying to take you out, so you can get that one extra shot off on a concrete pattern. That's the way I would think about it. Okay, now we have the Noble Widow Mark XIV. This is a tank destroyer for the Wardens. Has a crew of 3, a driver, a gunner, and a commander. And it has a 160 armat cost in the garage, so between the light tanks and the medium tanks, coming to 480 armats for an EPF crate. Again, no discount. Disables at 30% hit points, and it has a main armament of a 68mm anti-tank gun with high velocity. So that high velocity will give you an extra 75% bonus to damage. It has no secondary armament, and that 68mm gun will reach out to 40 meters. It has a reload speed of 4.5 seconds, so very quick, especially with the firepower that it brings to the table. Its health is at 2200. It's still respectable. However, compared to later game medium tanks, this vehicle really does fall short. It only takes a few penetrating hits to disable you. However, it has the most amount of armor in game currently at 17,650. That is ridiculous. This thing has a bounce chance of, I believe, at 0.17. Whereas most other tanks have 0.33 or 0.3 flat. So this thing can bounce for days. I have seen a whole collie tank push one of these, and all 6 to 8 guns have bounced off of it. It is ridiculous. The speed on road is very, very slow at a very bad rate of 3.6 meters per second on road, and that falls to 2.8 meters per second in the dirt. Fuel capacity is 225 liters, which is not bad. However, it has a fuel consumption rate of 30 liters a minute, which means you're going to need to have a fuel tanker riding your ass the whole time you have this thing. It is bad. So nicknames will be the HTD, which is the most common one I've heard. It'll also be the Widow or the Heavy Tank Destroyer. Playstyle. This is a defensive line tank. It can be used on the offense, but you have to be very careful about it. Pros. Amazing armor, the best in game. An amazing AT firepower, tied for the best in game. The only thing it's tied with is the Colonial High Velocity Push Gun, the Smelter. Cons. The worst mobility of any tank in game, period. It's even worse than the Ballista. And it has one of the worst base fuel consumption rate of any vehicle in the game. And it also does have the low hit points compared to other medium tanks and other tanks that it goes up against. Additional specs. The HDD, as I've said, boasts the most armor protection in game at 70,650. Just for reference, the Devitt Mark III has 10,000. So you get an extra 7,650 armor points, which is just nuts. And its gun can only be pointed forwards, so you cannot engage anything that gets around to your flank. That fuel tank is located in the rear, and it is a very light tech. Typically, at least at the time of this recording, which is we're in War 94, this tank is always teched in the very last tier, so it's teched around tier 12, along with the high velocity 40mm. How to kill? Flank this is it with anti-tank infantry or tanks. She is a slow vehicle, and getting around behind her is a death sentence. She cannot turn very well either. So if you get behind her, unless you make a very big mistake, it's pretty easy for you to stay behind her. She will not be able to bring her gun to bear. Personal tips. The HCD should only be used in the defense against hordes of enemy armor. It can be used in the offense, but only with lots of friendly vehicle support, just to prevent enemy tanks from getting around her. It should never operate alone, as that leaves its flanks exposed to enemy tanks as well as infantry, and it should be the main anti-tank firepower in a tank line, and should be located in the middle of the tank with friendly lighter tanks, like Silverhands and Ironhides, providing flank watch, as well as taking those side shots for the Widow. Make sure to have a strong logi line when operating this thing, again, because it is a gas guzzler at 30 liters per minute for the consumption rate. Okay, now we have the Gallagher Outlaw Mark II. This is a cruiser tank for the Wardens, with a crew of 4 being the driver, the main gunner, the commander, as well as the machine gunner. It has a cost of 165 iron mats in the garage, so 5 iron mats cheaper than the Silverhand, or 495 iron mats per crate of 3 in the mass production factory. Again, no discount included there. It's disabled at 30% HP, normal. It has a main armament of 40mm gun, with a secondary armament of a 7.92mm storm rifle position in the hull. The 40mm gun is special. It does have 5 meters more range than standard, so 45 meters in total, with the machine gun reaching out to 41 meters. The reload speed is 5.5 seconds for the 40mm gun and 4 seconds for the machine gun. It has 2,700 health, which is better than the Widow and light tanks. However, it is the lowest of all medium tanks in the game, and it also has very poor armor at only 10,000. Again, that is the same as the Devitt MK III. The speed on road will not too impressive at 6.9 meters per second. Nice. And 4.6 meters per second off-road. This does have a boost, while boosting, you can get up to 9.6 meters a second on the road. Fuel capacity is 200 liters, so a little bit below average, but it more than makes up for it in one of the lowest base fuel consumption rates of any tank in the game at 12 liters per minute. Just keep in mind, while you are boosting, that jumps up to 71, so you don't want to be boosting unless you absolutely need to. So some nicknames you'll hear this thing be called is the Outlaw, or the Gallagher, and the playstyle of this thing. This is a flanking tank. Despite what many people believe, this is not a line tank. Okay, it has amazing mobility, good range on the main gun at 45 meters, that's above average, good anti-infantry weapons from the front with that storm rifle machine gun, and one of the lowest base fuel consumption rates of any vehicle in game. The cons, though, is its relatively poor survivability and the limited arc of fire on the hull machine gun. Additional specs: the 45 meter range of the 40mm gun allows it to shoot first in an engagement, and the additional boost capability means you can just get out of dodge quickly if you need to. And that storm rifle is an added bonus in case any infantry try and push you from the front. Fuel tanks located in the rear. The texture location is, again, late war, normally around tier 11 to 12, right around where the Silverhand gets unlocked. And how to kill this thing. You need to force the ally to get into a close range engagement where it cannot make use of its long range gun and better mobility. Remember, the tank itself does not have impressive defense, does not have very good survivability. However, it more relies on its speed and its mobility to survive an engagement. Some personal tips if you're using the Outlaw. This is the best flanking tank in game. It is designed to flank with its good boost, its good mobility, its low fuel consumption rate, and its long range gun. With the hull mounted machine gun, it can ward off enemy infantry from the front. However, just do be aware, if they come at you from the sides, that machine gun cannot engage them. Its 40mm gun can open fire first, with that bonus range. However, to use this thing to its most effectively, it does require a skilled crew, especially a driver, to make the most of it. This tank should not be used in battle lines. That is for Silverhands and Ironhides. I would actually prefer an Ironhide in a battle line than this thing, just because the Ironhide can take more hits without losing its armor. Whereas this thing, the armor goes down in a heartbeat. Okay, now we have the Gallagher Highwaymen Mark III. This is also a cruiser tank for the Wardens. A 3-man crew, the driver, the main gunner, and the commander. And this costs 170 armats per tank in the garage, or 510 per crate. Again, no discount. Same disable percentage, 30%. This is where it gets interesting. This has a main armament of 20mm dual cannons, and a secondary armament of a 12.7mm machine gun. So the 20mm guns can reach out to 35 meters, while the machine gun can reach out to 40 meters, so yes, the machine gun does outrange the main gun. The reload speed on the 20mm is 5 seconds, well, 3.5 seconds for the 50 cal. It has the same survivability as the standard Outlaw at 2,700 hit points and 10,000 armor, and the same mobility at 6.9 meters per second on-road, nice, and 4.6 meters per second off-road, with the max boost speed of 9.6 meters per second. Same fuel capacity, same amazing fuel consumption rate as the standard Outlaw at 200 liters fuel capacity and 12 liters a minute, but it still has that boostability, which means you will be consuming 71 liters per minute of fuel while you are boosting. So the nickname, most common you'll hear is the Highwayman, or some people also call it the Partisan tank. The playstyle, this is also a flank tank, but it's not the same as the Outlaw, just due to the its armament. So it has amazing mobility. This is the same chassis, so you do keep that. It has a potentially amazing firepower. Potentially there is the most important word in that sentence. As well as the commander machine gun. So the commander, upon pressing E when he ducks down into the hatch, he can control that machine gun. That machine gun can rotate 360 degrees, but it is very slow. Like it's like surprisingly slow. So just you got to be very careful of that. But it does shoot all the way around if you need to. Cons of this thing is the inconsistent main weapon. Inaccurate weapons for both. They're both bloom way out once you get past the 34th shot. And the slow machine gun traverse speed, I've already talked about that. And again, it shares the low survivability of this chassis. Some additional specs. The dual 20mm rapid-fire autocannon. So what that does, it essentially takes an ATR, an anti-tank rifle, except it has a low velocity debuff to it, so it only does half the damage of a normal anti-tank ATR shot. But it has an increased rate of fire, and it has double capacity at 16 shots in a magazine. So in the end, if you penetrate all your shots, you have the same damage per magazine as a normal ATR on an Outlaw chassis. How to kill this thing? Try to engage front on, so its shots are less likely to penetrate you. Rush from behind as infantry, as the machine gun rotation speed is abysmal. You can outrun the machine gun if you are close enough. But just do not let this thing get behind you. If it penetrates you, if it has a higher chance of penetrating you, this thing will tear you apart. There's no question about it. This thing will tear you apart if you let it get close enough on your backside. The only thing is this thing needs to get close to you on your backside to kill you. So tips. This tank is high risk, high reward. Due to its unique weapons, this vehicle requires a playstyle more aggressive than a Bardiche, and that is saying something. You can be a threat, provided you get in close without them noticing you, but your inaccurate guns, combined with your weak survivability, make this tank a liability more than an asset. So this tank, as it stands right now, in my opinion, is underpowered. Just with the low velocity debuff to it, it makes the ATR just not hit as hard as I feel it should. And as well as the cost being 170 armats. That's the same as the Silverhand, and more expensive than the standard Outlaw. It does not justify it. It's not justify the risk you gain from this. Just you will not be getting the amount of armats out of this as you put into it. So the way that you use this tank is this tank is designed to be a subsystem disabler. Think about it. If you're in a normal Outlaw and you take a shot at, let's say, a Spath from the side, that is one opportunity you get every 5.5 seconds to disable the Spatha's turret or tracks. With this thing, if you get in close enough, and you can potentially hit all 16 rounds, although theoretically, let's say 1/3 of that misses. That is still like 9, no, more than 9. That's like 10, 11 shots that are potentially subsystem disabling. My god, I cannot speak. So that's what this thing is potentially good at. It's all RNG. It all depends on the bounces and whether or not you can disable the enemy turrets beforehand. Because like in this thing, if you can disable the enemy turret in your first magazine, you will annihilate it because there's nothing they can do about it. However, equally as bad, you can bounce or miss your first magazine, and then you're fucked. That's the reason why this thing is just not very good. Like it just depends too much on RNG, and I find more often than not, the RNG will kick you in the ass, and you'll get absolutely fucked by your enemy. Okay, next we have the King Spire Mark I. This is a scout tank for the Warden faction with a crew of 2, a driver, and a command gunner. It has a cost of 80 armats in the garage, or 240 armats per vehicle crate in the MPF. No discount. Disabled at 30%, so just like its bigger siblings. It has a main armament of a 12.7mm machine gun in the turret with no secondary. It has a primary range of anywhere between 36 to 41 meters maximum, with a reload speed of 3.5 seconds, which is fairly quick. It has 1,350 health, which is quite respectable for what it is and when it unlocks, and 6,000 armor. I find that you'll never use the armor on this thing, really. It's a false positive. I find armor on anything below a light tank doesn't really matter. Its on-road speed is fairly quick at 7.3 meters a second, and its off-road speed is still respectable at 5.1. It has a big fuel capacity at 250 liters, with a low fuel consumption rate, sharing the same with the Outlaw at 12 liters per minute. Just keep in mind this thing does not get a boost, unlike the Outlaw. So nicknames is the Scout Tank or the ST. That's what you will hear it called, and this is a support flank partisan vehicle. It has great mobility. It's very small. It's very maneuverable. It has good anti-infantry weapons with that machine gun that is pretty accurate. It is a portable watchtower, as it does come equipped with a radio, so it can see. It does provide intelligence on the map for anything around it. I believe for 60 meters. Do not quote me on that. As well, it has a very fast turret rotation speed for that main gun. The cons is its weak survivability, especially compared to anti-tank weapons, and it also cannot go up against anything more armored than a truck or a half-track. You can't even go up against a half-track, honestly. So additional specs. This thing mounts a 12.7mm machine gun and a 360-degree traversable turret. The commander also acts as the gunner, so when pressing E, the commander goes into the tank and takes control of the main weapon. However, if he has head out, he can act just like a normal spotter. He can pull out his binos, he can scout, and he can just press E to hop in the gun when he needs to engage a target. The fuel tank subsystem is located in the rear, and this is actually a mid-war vehicle, unlocking it around tier 6, so well before any of the light tanks, the bigger tanks unlock. How to kill this thing. So any tank, anything armored with a 30mm cannon or an anti-tank rifle can't easily deal with the scout tank, as there's nothing it can do to you. If you are infantry, you can get close to it from the flanks. Just be careful, because that machine gun can whip around pretty quickly, and this thing is fast, so you just do have to be careful. But it will take hits, and it can get tracked. So personal tips for it. This vehicle is designed for anti-infantry work. It is great supporting larger tanks when dealing with armor, while a scout tank watches the end and the flanks of a tank line from approaching infantry trying to get around behind you. The scout tank excels at partisan work, where its radio provides intel, as well as being a huge threat to enemy infantry, untouchable by infantry or light vehicles like lodges or armored cars. There's nothing they can do to you. This thing is great as a partisan vehicle because against lodges, this thing will shred, and unless they have a sticky already on them, there's nothing the lodge drivers can do to you. Okay, now we have the King Gallant Mark II. This is a scout tank, again, for the Warden faction, with a crew of 2, so again you have the driver and then the command gunner. It is a little bit more expensive than the Mark I, at 90 armats in the garage, or 270 armats per crate in the MPF, no discount. Same disabled at percentage of 30%. It is armed with a 30mm cannon instead of a machine gun, with a max range of 35 meters. The reload speed is relatively slow for what it is at 5 seconds. However, it does have the same amount of health at 1,350. My bad, jeez. Imagine if I had 13,000 hit points. I've been nuts. And it has a little bit more armor at 7,500. However, again, I don't really find this really has an effect on it. Its speed on road is a little bit lower due to the extra armor, with 6.7 meters per second on road and 4.6 meters per second off road. It has the same fuel capacity, 250 liters, but it does have a slightly higher fuel consumption rate at 15 liters per minute. So nicknames for this is just the King Gallant, or some people call it the Gallant, and this is a support tank. So it has it sports good mobility. It's the same chassis. It is a little bit reduced, but it's still very good. And it is very good at early game anti-structure work with that 30mm cannon. And it is quite versatile. You can engage both structures, infantry, as well as enemy vehicles with it. The cons are its poor survivability, but it is a scout tank. It is not designed to one-on-one anything bigger than a tankette and win. And it also falls out of favor really quickly. Around the time of recording, this thing really only gets teched a tier or 2 before light tanks, and light tanks just outclass this in every way. So additional specs, the commander also acts as the gunner. I've already explained that. But it also has a 30mm cannon, which means it can engage structures and enemy vehicles. The fuel tank is located in the rear, and it is typically teched at around tier 7, and remember, light tanks are unlocked around tier 9, 8 to 9. So this thing only really gets seized like a couple days where it's really effective, and then it just falls off. How to kill this? You can engage it with AT infantry, as it has a 5-second reload main gun, so that it has to wait quite a bit before it can fire again. As well, anything bigger than it, anything like a hatchet or anything larger than that, can deal with this thing relatively quickly, as it is only armed with a 30mm gun. Personal types. The King Gallant is a good early anti-structure vehicle, as well as being a highly mobile chassis for a 30mm cannon, which can also damage enemy vehicles. Again, however, once the light tank gets unlocked, it outclasses the Gallant in every single way except for the price. The tank is okay in a support role, but has no real useful place in game as of April 2022. That's when I wrote the guide. It doesn't really have a useful place right now in August of 2022. This is before the 1.0 update. One more thing I want to say though. If you're a regiment and you want to teach your regiment your members how to tank, in my opinion, this is the best tank for doing that. It still acts like a normal tank. You have your tracks, it responds, it drives like a normal tank would do, and you still have a cannon, and you can still hit things, and it's very cheap. So all around, and it just makes this thing a really good little training platform to get your members used to tanking. So this is what I always try and use if I can to teach newer members, unless we're doing an actual operation where I try and get shit done. So now we have the Niska Mark I gun motor carriage, also known as the half-track. This is the Warden version with a crew of 2, but you can also have up to 5 passengers, 4 in the back and 1 seated beside the driver. It has a cost of the garage of 60 armats, or 180 per crate. Again, no discount. It is disabled at 30% HP. However, it does not really have a main armament. So if you don't know, half-tracks, instead of having a main gun, they have a tripod mount, which means you can mount any tripod weapon in the game, be it a full breaker, a mounted bone saw, or a machine gun. And mind you, if this is the Warden variant, you can still put collie weapons on it. So if you capture an ISG, this is a half-track with an ISG mounted on it, or a half-track with a Lamentum or a Typhon on it. Like, this thing is very, very versatile. It has 1,500 health and 4,600 armor, so it is a bit more survivable. It has a little bit more HP than the scout tanks, but it is, again, nothing special. It is fairly fast on-road with 8 meters a second, but it does lose its mobility off-road at 4.3. That's almost half the speed that it can get up to on-road. It has a fairly low fuel capacity, 150 liters. It's still not bad. You'll still be able to fight in it. But it makes up for that with a low fuel consumption rate at 12 liters per minute. So nickname is just the half track, or the HT, if someone's like writing about it in on the map or in the chat. This is a support vehicle. So it is very versatile platform. As I've explained, you can mount pretty much any tripod weapon you want on it. I do not believe you can mount an intelligence radio on it, though. So I could be wrong, but I highly doubt it. I've never tried. As well, it can carry a section of infantry on the back. You can have up to 4 infantry ride in the back with you. Just keep in mind, they're exposed from the sides, from the rear, if the enemy infantry is a crack shot. It is quite fast on road as well, and it turns really well. So it is fairly maneuverable, but its cons is its limited storage space for ammunition, unless you're using a machine gun. If you're using a machine gun, it's fine, but other than that, it can only carry 1 item per slot, similar to the mortar light tank. The crew, at least the gunner, is exposed on it, so if infantry gets around behind you, they can't shoot the gunner out. And it cannot turn on the spot. It is a half track, not a fully tracked chassis, so it's not quite as maneuverable in tight spaces, but it's still pretty good for what it is. And as well, it has low survivability when compared to later vehicles like tanks. Although that's to be expected of this. This is a half track and not a tank. So we already covered the additional specs. The fuel tank, it does not really have a fuel tank subsystem, as there's a half track, not a tank. It is located in the mid-war, right around tier 6, so right around where scout tanks are. I think 1 tier before it, so maybe around tier 5. How to kill. So no matter which weapon the half track has, if you can get to the back of it and shoot the gunner out, you can make the half track defenseless. As well, it can get tracked, so if you can track it, it is a sitting duck. Personal tips. The half track is one of the most versatile vehicles in game, being able to swap out whichever weapon they have equipped to deal with the current front. For example, if you see there's a lot of infantry on the front, you can mount a machine gun to it. But then if you roll up to an enemy bunker and you need to start whittling it down, you can mount a full breaker or an ISG onto it, and you can start working away at that. This thing, it can do anything. And then if you see enemy vehicles, you can mount a full breaker or a bone saw, or a Typhon if you've managed to find one as well. This thing is just all around very, very good. Very, very versatile. So yeah, that's about it for this thing. I don't know what else to say about it. It's just very versatile platform, very useful, but again, it is quite vulnerable if the enemy vehicles do have cannons, even like an ISG can rip this thing apart. Okay, now we have the Niska Blinder Mark II. This is also, it's technically a half track. I would class it as a tank destroyer. It's a Warden vehicle, and it has a crew of anywhere between 2 and 4. So 2 is the driver gunner, but it can have a passenger again seated beside the driver, as well as a spotter in the back. It has a cost of 85 armats per vehicle in the garage, or 255 armats per crate, no discount. It is also disabled at 30% hit points. Its main armament is a 68mm anti-tank gun, so it has a fairly dangerous weapon if you are an enemy tank. The primary range on it is 45 meters, so again that is above average. Most vehicles have a 40-meter range on their guns, most tanks do. It has reload speed of 5.5 seconds. Same armor and health as the standard half-track at 1500 HP and 4600 armor, and it is a little bit slower due to the added weight of the weapon, at 7 meters a second on-road and 3.9 meters a second off-road. The fuel capacity is the same, 150 liters, and it has a base fuel consumption rate of 15 liters per minute. So again, it is a little bit poor, but you can make do with it. The nickname, the most common thing you'll hear this is the ATHD. That's the most common. It's the quickest way for someone to talk about this. That is really the only one you'll ever hear. This is a support/sniper vehicle. There is a reason why I call it a sniper. Pros: it has a good AT firepower with a 68mm gun at 45-meter range. It has pretty decent mobility. Again, you cannot turn on the spot, but you can turn pretty quickly with it. The cons is the slow gun rotation speed, so it cannot traverse very fast. As well, it has a limited arc of fire, only facing forwards. It has poor infantry and structure firepower. Again, this is really only designed to take on enemy tanks. And it has poor survivability, again, being on the half-track chassis. So this half-track boasts a 45-meter range 68mm anti-tank gun, capable of outranging most foes it will face in the battlefield, but it does, however, require communication, as the gun has a narrow arc of fire and a slow traverse speed. As well, one thing to note is you do not want to get within range of enemy tanks, as a tank versus a half-track, even with a 68mm gun, the half-track you will not win most of the engagement unless you get lucky. You will not win the engagement. Again, it does not have a fuel tank subsystem, so you cannot get fueled, and it does unlock a little bit later, normally after near or after scout tanks, but before light tanks, around tier 7 to tier 9. How to kill this thing? Really, infantry is the way to kill this thing. You can either go around behind, you can shoot the gunner out, as well as the spotter. The spotter is also exposed, seated in the back, or just getting any AT from the side will not also easily deal with this. This thing does not have the armor to take very many hits, as well as not the HP to be able to survive and stay above that 30% threshold for very long. Personal tips. This vehicle should be placed to the side of Silverhand's in a tank line, as it brings a sizable AT punch to the tank line with a good range. It can really reach out and hit the enemy vehicles before they can hit it. However, it is exposed if there are no friendly anti-infantry weapons to cover the flanks, seeing as the gunner can be shut out by small arms fire from the rear. Finally, for the Warden faction, we have the APC. So this can seat a crew of 2 in the front compartment, with 6 infantry riding in the back. It has a cost at the garage of 20 armats, or 60 armats per crate, and again, no discount on that. It does get cheaper the more crates you make. It's also disabled at 30% HP, and it has no weapons attached to it. It has 2,000 health and 5,450 armor. It is relatively slow on land at only 5 meters a second, but it is pretty fast on the water, as it is amphibious. It is an APC at 6 meters a second. It has a relatively low fuel capacity of 150 liters, but it makes up for that with its very low fuel consumption rate at 9 liters per minute. So this is mainly a partisan vehicle or a troop transport. This is also the best vehicle, period, for engagements out at sea. It can drive across bodies of water and carry 6 infantry in the back, as well as 1 beside the driver, so really can carry 8 soldiers total. The cons: it has no built-in defense against enemy vehicles unless the infantry is carrying anti-tank weapons. It has very poor survivability and very poor mobility as well. It does not turn very well. It's not a tank, it's an armored personnel carrier. So it can carry 6 infantry in the back, and the back rank can raise and lower. But its real firepower comes from the infantry in the back, as they can stand up and shoot a primary weapon while in the back. So that means that they cannot fire an ATR over the sides. If the infantry is prone in the back, and you can drop that back ramp, and they can shoot the ATR out the rear, being quite accurate. It does not have a fuel tank subsystem, and it also does not have a track subsystem. So just keep that in mind when you're engaging it. Don't bother aiming for the tracks, just try and hit the thing itself. It's not very survivable. It was also located relatively early in the war at tier 6 for iron, and the way you kill this is really any form of anti-tank will be able to kill the APC. Just do be careful to try not to get in range of all the infantry in the back, as you can get killed before you get close enough to launch your AT weapon. Personal tips. The APC fulfills a very niche role in the game, that it can carry infantry both on land and on the water. My only suggestion is to avoid getting too close to infantry, as a well-placed grenade will kill everybody in the back, and I've seen that happen, and it's very funny, provided you are not in the back. Well, it is also funny if you're in the back, but it's also not very good for you. Also avoid any anti-tank structures, as this thing cannot really deal with them, because they will chew through you before you can really get it close enough for your infantry to attack it. And without further ado, that is all the vehicles for the Warden faction in the mid to late game. I really hope you enjoyed, and I really hope you got something out of it. But without further ado, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.